I call on Professor Julie McLeod, Pro-Vice-Chancellor Research Capability, to introduce Professor Joseph Lo-Bianco, who has kindly agreed to deliver the occasional address.
This morning, the University welcomes Professor Joe Lo-Bianco as guest speaker. Professor Lo-Bianco is a Professor of Language and Literacy Education in the Melbourne Graduate School of Education and past President of the Australian Academy of the Humanities. His areas of specialisation include peace and conflict in multi-ethnic settings, as well as language policy studies and bilingualism and intercultural education. Professor Lo-Bianco was author of Australia's 1987 National Policy on Languages. He has been an invited consultant in 25 countries since 1990, addressing language problems in education and in wider society. He has led major language education writing teams and research projects for organisations in Europe and Asia, including a 12-country municipal-level study of multilingualism for the European Commission. Since 2012, Joe has directed multi-country policy projects for UNICEF and UNESCO. He has an extensive list of publications with a strong recent focus on social cohesion, peace and conflict mitigation. Please join me in welcoming Professor Joseph Lo-Bianco.
Presiding Chancellor, Presiding Academic Party, distinguished guests, family, friends, and most importantly, graduating students. I was deeply honoured to be asked to speak to you today. In my personal life and in the life of my family, education represents a form of emancipation and progress that more cynical people rarely understand or appreciate. I remember all 6 of my tertiary degree graduations vividly. I picture my parents nervous and uncomfortable at Monash University in 1976 for my first degree, and my mother proud and slightly bewildered for my PhD at the Australian National University 24 years later. I remember the meals we had after, the gowns we wore, and the discussions that we engaged in. And, ominously, I also remember the graduation speakers and the talks they gave. I still wince at one of them, whose talk miscued very badly. All his jokes fell flat, like a bridegroom's gauche best man at a wedding. But I do remember another one who genuinely inspired the graduating students, who made a serious effort to talk to us about something substantive in her life and her care and consideration for our future. I belong to the first Australian generation for whom higher education became widely affordable. It was the beginning of a new and radical thinking that tertiary study could be a normal life path for all who desire it, and even more deeply, that extended study with an element of independent research could allow individuals to establish their personal academic signature in life. In this new thinking, such opportunities should not be denied to poor, bright students willing to work hard, rather than being a lottery or the result of privilege, position, habit, or status. This is a historic transformation of widening access and deepening opportunity, and it's sought to make all our public institutions resemble our society more fully and more fairly. But there is still a long way for us to travel on this road. No aspiration so deep and socially transformative could be achieved quickly or without some turbulence. To this day, education remains one of our nation's most controversial public goods, contested in politics and in society alike, because of the lasting and deep benefits it confers on individuals, whether in the income they can earn through their life or the social capital they can acquire, the mental emancipation that education affords, or the critical disposition that as your lecturers we have aimed to instil in you, but that really ultimately comes from deep reading of texts. I would not be truthful if I implied that I have always found university life has lived up to its promise. But as that old bumper sticker adage used to say, if you think education is expensive, you should try ignorance. The simplest aphorisms are often the most profound. Nelson Mandela, with whom I was proud to have a brief meeting in South Africa on 2 occasions in the mid-1990s, is justly admired for his extraordinary decency, moral character, and firm determination. He once said, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world, and anyone can do it." Changing the world essentially means changing the people who occupy the world, and so Mandela asks us to do much more than teach knowledge and skills, but to cultivate critical and responsible citizenship. I will be retiring from full-time academic life in 6 months' time. And the most powerful and abiding lesson I take with me is one I have realised only very recently in the extent that I have. I've come to appreciate something I, like most people in Australia, have taken far too much for granted. In one of the places I have worked since 2004, almost 200 teachers have been killed in acts of political violence directed at schools. In another, primary school children pick their way to the school door in practiced steps to avoid stepping on uncleared landmines. In another setting, it is marked by deep segregation between groups, incubating ignorance and fueling mistrust. Only teachers teaching safely, respected for their skills and trusted for their professional ethics represent any hope for civil life in such circumstances, but in ours too. After work assignments of this kind, I often found myself saying several things that might sound obvious until they are absent, or banal until you see life without them. That teaching is also an act of respectful listening to other people, and this is important for civil life in a community. That the ability to express firm opinions is necessary in a democratic society, but we must also learn, and teachers can teach, how to conduct disagreement to prevent antagonism. That civil discourse requires seeing both a person holding a view and the substance of their opinion. I say all these things aware that Australia is not that kind of conflict-affected society. Our tensions and struggles and differences all broadly reside within a matrix of shared democratic discourse. The point we often ignore, because the process is slow and developmental, is that what happens in our schools, in work that is regularly done by teachers and invoked in curriculums, is the task of cultivating the norms and the practices of shared citizenship. Your journey now to new careers or resuming old careers is fortified by study and reflection and bolstered by the credentials you have earned and will celebrate today. The education context you will enter is radically unlike the one I entered. Curriculum change, influenced by international standardised testing, increasingly impacts on our schools, creating the potential for education to be more globally linked and even fully transcultural. Those of you who are going out into teaching for the first time are the first population in world history in which education is emerging as a world-minded enterprise. We should be pleased by this and maybe a little alarmed as well. Pleased because the prospects of internationally connected education underscore our common human destiny, our shared likeness. The emergence of a linked market for expertise and portable credentials offers you the potential of fashioning a global career, enriched by different traditions of life and value systems. But today, the standards and aims on which education is scored reflect the interests of too few, and only the experience and skills of dominant traditions. A narrow view of human culture, experience, language, problems and identities will not serve us well in living across our differences. Still, you really are the first cohort of educators to step into a system where research knowledge, technological innovation and cultural practices can travel and influence and shape local realities everywhere. an integrated and borderless marketplace of credentials, skills and understanding about education might still be some way off, but its outlines are clear to see, and your role within it is secure. But as Mandela exhorts us, you will not just teach subjects and skills excellently, you must also advocate for deeper and more democratic life. While learning is the central dynamic of education, it also is the vector for personal improvement for millions of people and social progress for whole societies. For enlightenment as well as employment, education is poetry as well as prose, music as well as mathematics, languages as well as literacy. Some of these ideas might seem quaint, but as I approach retirement, I often think how I would have loved an education myself in which the subjects I was able to take were ones I was interested in and not the ones that a small, isolated, rural school could offer. We had no languages, no music, no art and no drama, poor science and uninteresting English. Curriculum today offers time for all of this, and our country has enough wealth to make it happen. So make children literate and multilingual, and make them sing as well as read, do science calculations as well as business planning. I'll mention only two dimensions of this global education that is emerging, PISA and the SDGs. The Program of International Student Assessment is an instrument to rank education performance in more than 65 countries. It ranks them according to academic achievement of 15-year-olds in mathematics, science and reading. National and state governments sweat on PISA's triennial results. Education ministers, editorial boards of newspapers, the political opposition all leap on the evidence to either criticise or to boast. Even 15 years ago, this did not happen. But today, we accept that international tests managed in faraway Paris can shape domestic education delivered in here and now Melbourne. And alongside PISA are the SDGs. On the 1st of January 2016, a full 193 nations, the entire cohort of the United Nations, adopted 17 Sustainable Development Goals that picture a coherent future for a shared world, an integrated universal agenda. Our government has ratified these goals, which aim to mobilise effort to combat poverty and inequality, tackle climate change, and guarantee excellence and high standards in education. At their core is the work of teachers in building resilience with learning, excellence in academic achievement with social commitment, a balance between the humanities and the arts, and the sciences and the technologies. This is the unprecedented education world that you enter as professionals, and the students you teach will inherit it as a normalised reality. I cannot think of a more exciting prospect, both because it is vast in its aims and noble in its ambitions, but also because it must still be built. It will only be achieved with struggle alongside science and pedagogy. And all of these depend on our ability to talk openly, and this, in turn, is dependent on our capacity to maintain trust, and that, in turn, is learned in classrooms. So, in conclusion, teaching today and education in general is richer and more promising than it ever has been. I trust and assume our work as lecturers and supervisors has equipped you well for this, and I urge you to seize opportunities with confidence. I wish you good health and professional success. I congratulate your achievement. It is always a relief and a joy to finish the long slog of degree study, but the reward is with you for your entire career. I commend your network of intimates, your family and friends for supporting you, and I urge you to go forth and educate. Thank you.
On your behalf, ladies and gentlemen, I thank Professor Lo Bianco for addressing us this morning.